Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, 29 members of Sudan's National Intelligence Service are sentenced to death over the killing of a protester earlier this year. The teacher died in detention during crackdowns on protests that toppled former strongman Omar al-Bashir. Also, Turkey plans on sending Syrian allied troops to Libya. There, the besieged government in Tripoli is under attack from eastern forces led by General Khalifa Haftar, but they're concerns Ankara's intervention could escalate the conflict. And Niger's been the target of several jihadist attacks over the past few years. But despite this, on Sunday, the country held its first ever marathon in the hopes of showing that it's still in the running to host top cultural events. But first, 29 members of Sudan's National Intelligence Service were sentenced to death on Monday over the torture and killing of a protester detained back in February. 13 defendants were also handed prison terms over the death of Omar al-Khair. He died during months of protests that led to the ousting of former strongman Omar al-Bashir in April. The teacher is one of hundreds of demonstrators who lost their lives in crackdowns on protests. Monday's sentences and the prosecution of National Intelligence Service members were welcomed as signs that things are changing in Sudan under its transitional government. Naba Mohideen was in court in Omdurman when the verdict was announced. She tells us more.
People were so happy. People came from everywhere from Sudan. They came in very big protests, in buses and cars. People came from his hometown far in the east of the country. And high school students, because he was high school student, people came to the court to hear the verdict the moment it was released, and they were expecting, they were so suspicious about the verdict, but they expected like 4 or 7 people will be convicted. They were so happy when they announced that 29 intelligence agents, they are convicted with the killing. People chanted, celebrated the same day that al-Bashir regime fall down back in April 11th. It was a huge protest and huge million-person march, and people were so happy. Even the families of the protest victims who were killed in June the 3rd during the uprising, at any time they came, and they were so hopeful that after hearing this verdict, justice will be sustained in the country.
So clearly people are happy and welcomed what this represents. But altogether, bearing in mind, 29 people were given a sentence, but that doesn't compare to the hundreds of people estimated to have lost their lives during the uprising. Does this sentence go far enough?
Actually, people, they think it's not enough, but at least it's the first step towards sustaining democracy and transitional judiciary system. Because people previously, they didn't trust Sudanese judiciary. And for example, today, a lot of families, they went to the prosecutor and they opened trials against intelligence agents, and they expressed that they can't trust the judiciary system. So it was not enough, but it was the first step towards optimistic people that they think that maybe justice will be sustained. And he was one protester, but he represents the whole country, as he was a teacher and he was tortured in a very, very bad way. So yes, people, they think it's not enough, but a real victory for the first time in Sudanese history.
Naba Mohideen there for us. Well, in a look now at some news in brief, al-Shabaab militants have claimed responsibility for the car bombing in Mogadishu that killed 81 people on Saturday. It was the deadliest attack the country suffered in 2 years. Al-Shabaab was forced out of the Somali capital in 2011, but still controls part of the countryside and regularly stages violent attacks in the city. The streets of Monrovia were surprisingly calm on Monday after Liberian opposition leaders put a mass anti-government rally that had been planned on hold for a week. International observers had recommended the postponement, and the government said that it couldn't provide security for the originally scheduled event. A new date's been set on January the 6th. Demonstrators are frustrated with the country's deepening economic crisis. And former Army General Umaru Sissoco Embalou has said that he is the winner of Guinea-Bissau's presidential election. He may have jumped the gun just a bit, though. Voters headed to the polls for a runoff vote on Sunday to find a replacement for incumbent José Mario Vaz. Embalou, who's a former prime minister, was up against another ex-premier, Domingos Simoes Pereira. The Electoral Commission has yet to comment on the vote count, and the final result is due out on Wednesday. Well, Turkey's pushing through with emergency legislation to send Syrian allied troops to Libya. There, the besieged government in Tripoli has been calling for international help with battling forces that are trying to topple it. But there are concerns that Ankara's move risks inflaming the war. Camille Nedlek has more.
A building in ruins and the ground strewn with rubble after an air raid on this city about 10 kilometres away from Tripoli. It's the second such bombing in the space of a few days after General Khalifa Haftar called for his army to launch a final deadly push against the UN-backed Libyan government based in Tripoli. But scenes like this one could be about to become even more frequent after Tripoli called for international help in facing the threat. Turkey wants to send in its Syrian allies to support the Libyan government. The country is a major export market for Turkey, and Ankara says it needs to protect its own interests. Although critics see it as a move to extend Turkey's influence. After it signed a maritime delimitation agreement with Tripoli, which gives Turkey rights over a vast area rich in oil. The threat of further escalation has left both Egypt and France worried. They back General Haftar, but are calling for dialogue.
The two heads of state believe that the risks of a military escalation require all international and Libyan actors to exercise the utmost restraint. They want a political agreement to be found within the framework of the United Nations in order to restore the unity and full sovereignty of Libya.
Egypt is also calling for an urgent meeting with the Arab League, and UN-sponsored talks are scheduled for January in a bid to stop the fighting. Some 140,000 Libyans have already fled their homes since April.
Niger's been the target of several jihadist attacks over the past few years. Nevertheless, on Sunday, the country held its first ever marathon, despite the risks. It's hoping to show that it's still in the running in hosting top-flight events. Nicolas Chemin tells us more.
Running a marathon is not easy. Running one in a desertic region like Agadez is even harder. Niger's first ever marathon was placed under heavy security. The country has been struck by several jihadist attacks in recent years. On the 10th of December, 71 soldiers were killed. But the marathon took place without incident. Niger runner Rabeh Hassau won the event in 2 hours and 50 minutes.
This race was really symbolic because people think that Agadez is out of bounds, that it's unsafe. Now this marathon will pave the way for them to come here. It's safe here. People can come from anywhere in the world, God willing.
The aim of the organizer was to change the image of this region.
This marathon effectively brings together athletes, young people, to enable them to talk about a beautiful Niger, a beautiful region. It allows them to exchange ideas on peace, on coexistence, and to strengthen cohesion between communities, between the different groups of the 8 regions of the country.
Slowly or swiftly, some 800 runners took part in the marathon. They came not only from Niger, but also from Togo, Benin, Ivory Coast, Morocco and France.
And finally, to someone else who's pretty good at keeping up with the competition, Tanzanian footballing whiz Hadara Minjeje is the queen of the keepy-uppy. Her skills have made her a viral sensation. MJJ travels around the continent, wowing crowds and charging for her performances. She says that she started out small, but has big ambitions for her footballing skills.
I started juggling using oranges, and I liked it a lot. I watched Ronaldinho, Messi, Ronaldo, Zizou. They inspired me. I used oranges, then a handmade football, and then finally a proper football.
Well, as I head on out of here, I will leave you with more of JJ's stellar footwork. Thanks very much for joining us, and do so again if you can. Take care.